Some people fish for fish, others fish for thoughts. Today I was thinking about something, a small parable about a fisherman. He woke up early every day, went to the lake, prepared the rod, but he never cast the line. He said it wasn't the right moment yet. He waited for the wind to die down, waited for the sun to rise a bit higher, waited for the water to get calmer. When the wind stopped, he thought it might be better to wait until late afternoon. When the afternoon arrived, he said that the next day the fishing would be better. And so he spent hours by the lake with everything ready, but without ever casting the line. And one day someone asked, "Didn't you come to fish?" And he replied, "I did, but I'm waiting for the ideal moment." And perhaps we do something similar with life. There is this silent feeling that living will start later. After something ends, after something improves, after we are more ready, we think, when I have more time, when I resolve this, when I am more tranquil, when everything aligns, and without noticing, the present becomes just an interval, a place of passage, as if life were always right there, a little bit ahead. You wake up, but you already wake up thinking about what comes next. You resolve things waiting for the moment when you will be able to relax. You plan, imagining when you will finally see with more calm that there is always this silent promise. In the future, it will be different. In the future, I will breathe better. I might enjoy it more. I know. I will be more present. But the curious thing is that this future never arrives exactly as we imagine, because when it arrives, it has already become now. So without noticing, the mind creates another after, another ideal moment, another point further ahead, like the fisherman by the lake, with everything ready, waiting just a little longer. And meanwhile, the water continues to move, the wind passes, the light changes, the day advances, and perhaps life is exactly what happens while we wait for the right moment to start living, because there is no clear signal, nor will there be a perfect instant marked as that ideal moment. There is only a lake, exactly as it is now, and sometimes the only thing missing is to cast the line. But there is something curious, which is that even when we cast the line, the mind continues looking forward. Because it is not just about starting, it is about this constant feeling that something better is to come. We don't just wait for a moment to start living. We wait for a moment in which living will become easier, clearer, more complete, as if there were a point in time where everything finally organizes itself. And this creates a kind of silent promise that in the future, I will be more tranquil, I will understand better, I will live with more presence. Without noticing, the future begins to function as an imaginary place where life happens in a more intense way. If we take Kierkegaard as an example, he said that the human being lives exactly between these two tensions, what has already been and what is not yet. And often this second part occupies more space because the future seems to have infinite possibilities. It is open, it is flexible, you can fill the future with promises. The present, however, seems quite small, limited, too concrete, I would say. So the mind does something almost automatic. It projects meaning forward. Heidegger described this as a fundamental characteristic of existence. We are always thrown toward what has not yet happened, always anticipating ourselves. But there is a silent consequence in this. When everything is lived as preparation, the present, your present, loses its density. It becomes just a bridge, an interval between the now and the after. You do something thinking about what will come, resolve a stage imagining the next. You finish the day waiting for the following one. And the curious thing is that this promise never fully fulfills itself, because when the future arrives, it does not come as the future. It comes as now. And the now carries the same uncertainties, the same questions, and even the same movements. So, what does our mind do? It creates another after, another point ahead. It is like walking around a lake, thinking that at the next curve, the landscape will finally be perfect. But each curve reveals only more lake. Nothing changes radically, but something inside of us keeps waiting. The problem is that we treat life as if it were a destination, when it is more like a process, like a song that doesn't need to reach the end to be felt. Each note by itself is already part of the experience. And perhaps the problem isn't imagining the future, but believing that life is stored in it. Because meanwhile, the wind continues passing, the water will continue moving, and the day will continue advancing. The sensation of living continues happening only in one place, here. And even so, we continue looking forward as if there were something more important just ahead, something that will finally bring the sensation that we have arrived. But there is a detail that I think is almost imperceptible in all of this. The future never presents itself as the future, and that changes everything, because what you imagined, when it finally happens, does not have the same form it had in your mind. You think of a more tranquil moment. It arrives, but along with it come new questions. You imagine more time. It appears, but it is filled by other things. The horizon shifts. It is almost as if you were in a boat in the middle of a lake, rowing toward a point where the water seems calmer. But when you arrive, you realize that the surface continues moving, not because something went wrong, but because the lake was never still. St. Augustine wrote something very cool about time. He said that the future does not exist. What exists is only the expectation of the future lived in the present. In other words, when we think about tomorrow, we are thinking about it now. When we imagine what will come, that is also happening now, because the future is always a construction of the present. And this creates a silent paradox, because we live waiting for something that can only be lived when it has already become now. You wait for the end of a phase. It arrives and is no longer the future you imagined. You wait for a moment of clarity. It appears, but soon it dissolves into new questions. Not because life is denying you that moment, but because life does not fix itself. One of the reflections that I think fits best for this would be from Heraclitus, when he says that no one enters the same river twice, because the water is always changing and the person who enters also changes. And perhaps with time, it is exactly like that. We never arrive at the same future because it is never the same. This can generate a very curious sensation, that of always being a little bit before, always on the way, always towards something that has not yet arrived. But what if this sensation is not an error? What if it is just the way the mind works? Because the mind creates lines, arrival points, ideal moments, but experience is not linear. It is more like the water of this lake. There is no point where the water finally stabilizes. It is always in motion, and perhaps what we call arriving is just an instant in which we stop rowing. But this instant is not in the future. It can only happen now. There is a simple story that manages to summarize some of this, which is about a man who wanted to cross a lake. He built a boat. He entered the water. He began to row, and during the entire path, he thought about the other side. He imagined what it would be like, how he would feel when he finally arrived. But what happens? In the middle of the crossing, something began to catch his attention. The reflection of light on the water, the soft sound of movement, the wind passing. And for a moment he realized that he was already in the lake, not just crossing, but living the crossing. The other side continued to exist, but it ceased to be the only focus. And perhaps the future works a bit like that. It continues there, but it doesn't need to carry all the meaning of life, because while we wait, the crossing is happening. The sounds exist, the details appear, the experience forms itself, and often what we call life is not at the arrival point, but in this silent movement, in your daily rowing, in your observing, in your perceiving. The future never arrives because it is not a place. It is only a direction, and a direction is not something you reach, it is something you travel. Exactly like that man inside the boat, who at some point realized that there is no other place more alive than exactly where he is. And there is a silent effect when this idea begins to mature. It is not immediate, and it doesn't happen all at once. It is almost as if time stops being a race and starts being something that simply happens. You continue doing the same things. The days continue full. The responsibilities will not disappear. But something changes in the way you move within it. Before, there was always a sensation that something important was ahead. Now, that urgency diminishes, not because you gave up on plans, but because you realize they don't carry that weight of starting to live. You have already started. There is a slight difference between preparing for life and living while preparing. This difference is small, almost invisible, but it changes the experience. Time ceases to be an enemy that needs to be caught, and it becomes a space where you are. You realize that you don't need to wait for a lighter day to breathe better, nor an ideal moment to observe, nor a perfect phase to finally feel the presence. All of this can happen in the middle of what is already happening now. And it is curious because the mind always believed that living fully required specific conditions: silence, free time, clarity. But experience shows something different. Presence appears in the middle of the noise, in the middle of the tasks, in the middle of the movement. You are walking and suddenly perceive your own step. You are resolving something and notice the sound around you. You can be in an ordinary day and something catches your attention. It's not because the day changed, but because you changed the way of being in it. Psychological suffering is born in large part from this constant escape from the present, from the attempt to always live in another moment. But when this escape diminishes, there doesn't emerge an explosive happiness. Something much simpler emerges, a silent lightness. It is almost as if the mind stopped pushing the experience forward, almost as if an instant stopped being an obstacle and started being the place itself. And this doesn't mean living without thinking about the future. The future continues to exist, but now as a direction. It ceases to be the only important point. You plan, but you do not absent yourself. You imagine, but you continue perceiving. There is a maturity in this. That of understanding that life doesn't start when everything is resolved. It continues even while everything is open. Perhaps this is the most profound change, not trying anymore to arrive at an ideal moment, but perceiving that each moment is already part of the experience, and nothing needs to be extraordinary, nothing needs to be definitive. Just being is already enough. And when this sensation appears, time ceases to be something that escapes and becomes something that reveals itself one instant at a time, not all the time and not in a constant way, but in small moments. You realize that you are no longer waiting so much, that you don't feel that necessity that something needs to change first, because there already exists a kind of silent acceptance of what is happening. And this is not conformism. It is not giving up on improving. It is just stopping postponing experience until everything is perfect, because perhaps it never will be. Life does not organize itself completely. It continues in movement. There is always going to be something uncertain, something incomplete, something that hasn't been resolved, and yet you are here. And there is a certain tranquility in this, a sensation that it isn't necessary to run so much, that you won't need to reach this specific point to start living with more presence. The mind begins to decelerate, not because you forced it, but because there isn't that much urgency anymore. Before, there was always a kind of invisible line on the horizon, a moment where everything would make more sense, a point where finally you would be ready. But then, with time, you realize that this line always shifts, and that perhaps it was never the most important thing. The most important thing was always here on the path. And this doesn't boil down to a pretty phrase, but rather to a concrete experience, with the sound of the environment, the breathing happening, the body moving, the simple details. None of this depends on the future. None of this needs to wait. There is a very subtle change when you perceive this. You continue planning, continue building, continue imagining, but the weight disappears. The future ceases to be a promise and becomes just a possibility. And this opens space for something much lighter, a relationship with time that is different. You no longer feel that you are late. You don't feel that life hasn't started yet. You don't feel that you need to arrive somewhere to finally live. There is only a continuous flow without a marked beginning, without a definitive point. And this doesn't take away the meaning of things. On the contrary, when you are no longer waiting, each moment gains more presence. The coffee is not just an interval. The path is not just a displacement. The silence is no longer just the vacuum. Everything begins to have more density, not because it changed, but because you stopped living only for later. There is a phrase that says that the miracle is not walking on water. The miracle for us, human beings, is walking on the earth. That is, not living something extraordinary, but perceiving what is already happening. And this perception does not require a constant effort. It appears, disappears, it returns, gets lost, but each time it emerges, it leaves something, a silent memory that life is not in the future and never was. In fact, the future is just an idea, a direction, a constructed image. Experience only exists now. And this is not a definitive conclusion. It is not any closed answer. It is just a change of look. You continue walking, you continue imagining, you continue building, but without postponing the moment, without waiting for the ideal day, without needing to arrive first. Because deep down the future never arrives. It always transforms into this instant. And perhaps this is what we were looking for the whole time. Not a perfect moment, not a tranquil phase, but this simple perception that living doesn't happen later, it happens now. Well, if this flow of thought made sense to you, I invite you to share your vision here in the comments, your perception about time, about your daily life, about your experience of living this process. And in case you are not yet subscribed to the channel, I invite you to be part of this community.